Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy, I'm the host of the show, and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. It's about 1 a.m. on a Thursday, the day this comes out. I just listened to the Magnetic Field's 100,000 Fireflies, and the Superchunk cover of it about 10 times in a row, something like that. There's a line in it that I can't get over, and I'm surprised I didn't. I'm surprised the last 2 years in Los Angeles have not made me think of this line at all. But towards the end, it goes, why do we still live here in this repulsive town? All our friends are in New York. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's really resonating. Can't believe I listened to 100,000 Fireflies when I was in high school, and I identified with it then, living in the suburbs of Pennsylvania. And now I identify with it again, living in the suburbs that are Los Angeles. Anyway, I'm very excited. This is a wonderful episode. I was so psyched to have these guys on. And if you have not looked at your podcast app or the website, then it is a surprise for you to find out right now that today's guests are Bad Books. If you don't know who they are, let me read you their bio. On today's episode, I talked to Andy Hall and Kevin Devine of the indie rock band Bad Books. While both Andy and Kevin have successful careers with other bands, Andy with Manchester Orchestra and Kevin as a New York-based singer-songwriter, Bad Books is their decade-long collaboration that formed after Kevin began touring with Manchester Orchestra in 2007. Together, they've written 3 albums, a self-titled LP in 2010, 2012's 2, Roman numeral 2, and then 3, Roman numeral 3, which will be released this Friday. It's great. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to it and then buy it tomorrow. Anyway, I didn't really know much about Andy or Kevin, just their music before they came over. And what a talk we have. A lot about faith. Andy is the son of a pastor, so we get into that. And that just kind of is the beginning of a long conversation that kind of spirals off of that. And it's wonderful. These guys are really, not only are they good musicians, but they are good humans. So strap yourselves in for a great talk. Before that, I just want to say, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, thank you for checking out the show. If you want to check out other episodes, all of them are on Spotify or beginnings.libsyn.com if you want to download them. I've been doing this show for about 9.5 years, so there are 400 plus episodes. You can download them all. You can just browse through some. I can suggest a couple for you, like a Netflix. If you like this, you might also like this. So if you like Bad Books, you might also like some of the other talks I've had, such as Mitski, Tim Kinsella, Rachel Brown of Field Mouse, Matt Sharp from Weezer, Will Cullen Hart of Olivia Tremor Control, Mira, Colin Newman from Wire, The Blow, Colleen Green, Anna Warrenker of That Dog, Dean Wareham of Luna and Galaxy 500, and 2 that are pretty relevant based on today's talk. Radical Face from a couple months ago was wonderful, and Sun Lux, who grew up, Ryan Lott from Sun Lux, he grew up evangelical, and we talk a lot about that on his episode. Very interesting stuff. If you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or Google Play and probably 10,000 other places. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. And that's about it. I think that I'm going to be doing the show bi-weekly for a little while because of some writing stuff. So a couple weeks, I've talked to the band Bleached. That was really great. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let's talk to Andy and Kevin. So I have small biographical pieces of information about you. You're a New York boy, and Atlanta, and then Ontario, and then back to Atlanta.
Yes.
And that's all the information I was able to find
That's
online.
great.
So if we can start from there, maybe.
Sure.
Maybe talk about why your parents, how your family ended up in Atlanta.
Yep.
And then over to Toronto and then back.
Yeah. So my grandparents were all on both sides of my family were like backwoods guys, like dirt road, came from nothing.
By the way, this is Andy.
This is
your
Andy.
voice.
Yes, this is my voice.
Kevin, do you
Hello.
want to say your voice?
Hi, this is Kevin.
I just realized that
This is my voice.
I'm not used to having more than one person on sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you for having us. So
That was a very public radio kind of.
Yeah, no, it's a real pleasure. Sorry,
backwoods.
So, but yeah, like my grandfather on my dad's side was a Tennessee backwoods guy, Jamestown, Tennessee, and they moved around the South. There was like Mississippi.
What's Jamestown, Tennessee?
Not a lot's there. That's where we actually just buried my grandmother there yesterday. As a matter of fact. Yeah, thank you.
How far
Yeah,
is that from
it's about
you guys?
6 hours from us.
I didn't know it was that far.
It is far.
that you
It's
went
in the
yesterday.
woods. Oh no! We didn't go there. We had the funeral. We had the service.
Got it.
We did have my grandfather's service there in Jamestown, and a lot of the roads are named after family members through the family. Like the town is sort of like that. Actually, goes all the way back to a guy named Cordell Hull, who I believe was the Secretary of Defense during World War II and right after. And there's like a big museum for him in Tennessee. So yeah, I'm actually a relation to that guy, which is crazy. And so eventually landed in Georgia, in Marietta, Georgia. My dad went to school at UGA, the University of Georgia, met my mother, and my dad he was a journalism major, and instead of going, basically it was like he was going to either go into media or he felt a calling to be a pastor, go into ministry. And so he started going into ministry. And
So he really did feel the call. It wasn't just like some thing in the back of his head.
No, in fact, I believe he was offered a position at CNN right when it was first starting, and like a place where he really could have worked his way up and been something. He's since then worked in television and has a very kind of he's a great media presence. He felt a calling, and so he started going into ministry. Did that for a while and started a church in Marietta called Mountain View. That was where I was born and was in school and church until I was about 6. Right before I turned 7, he got the opportunity, to go to Toronto to pastor this church, this really big church in Canada. And honestly, they just thought they could kind of step on him and use him as a sort of he's a young guy. We can sort of get this guy to do whatever we want. The church was sort of falling apart. And he came in, and my dad's whole career has sort of been going in places that are falling apart and turning them around. That's what he's used to.
He's like a vulture capital fund for churches.
Mm-hmm. And so then we moved to Toronto, which was an amazing, I was actually speaking with him about this the other day, a really amazing cultural shift for me and my views and my knowledge of other people outside of white people and black people. Those were the two things that I knew being in Georgia. And those two things in Georgia, and specifically certain parts of Georgia, can be complicated, especially because of the last 40 years and further.
Some might say 300 or 400,
but I just mean it's so close to it.
Right, right.
There was segregation when my dad was in high school.
Yeah.
So I go to Toronto. My dad's pastor of this church called People's Church, and I think there's 180 different nationalities. And all of a sudden, I was the minority. There weren't a lot of white kids. The very first school I went to was 26 kids in the class, 24 of them Chinese, and me and this other girl who's white. And so I went from Davy Crockett playing cowboys and Indians to Dragon Ball Z and anime and having no idea. So it was just this really big cultural shift, and I'm really grateful for it because it did change the way I looked at everything. So Dad pastors that church for 7 years. He wants to move back to the States. He takes a position there was like a leadership organization, which is essentially sort of like a step up from the missionary position. Like he would go into places and help them start churches and develop churches across the world. And he did it in like over 100 different countries.
What denomination?
Non-denominational.
So just Christian.
Christian, yeah.
But not evangelical? Like what is the...
I guess it would be evangelical, yeah. I mean, that was another thing when he started. I guess his first church was a Baptist church. I don't really buy into any of that stuff as far as like the differences of it. I don't think that that's really important. And essentially what you're believing, would be in Jesus, and there really shouldn't be that many other rules about it, So my dad was also a pastor's kid, and he didn't want me to have to be a pastor's kid, thank God. And so he stopped being a pastor.
Wait, okay, hold on. Well, I got a bunch of questions,
Sure.
and I kind of want to ping pong some of them over to you, Kevin, because one of the things I was thinking as you were talking...
It would be great if you wanted to ping pong to me about his...
Yes.
Well, I want to ask about his... I want you to answer the questions about his faith. But I am curious about, like, you growing up in New York, and then how do you become... These are very vastly different backgrounds. And...
Yeah. I think there are points of obvious divergence that are like geographic and like what's the right way to say it, like foundational in nature, in the sense that like if you well, go ahead and ask your question. Sorry, I could go off on that for a minute, but there's things that are the same and things that are different is the short version of what I was going to say, and maybe you can help me hone in on that.
Well, maybe we can just ask that broad question, and then I do have a question about faith then too. But what are the differences and similarities in this?
Well, to me,
yeah,
I think that I did grow up in New York, but I grew up. It's funny growing up in New York City because it's obviously it's a relatively small place geographically, but it's an enormous place demographically.
My wife's from Harlem.
Right.
So.
Okay. Right. So, for example, I grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is like Southwest Brooklyn. In many respects, that's like as far from someone growing up on the Upper West Side or Harlem as like if I grew up in like fucking Ohio or something like that. There's a real marked cultural difference even between like. And I grew up in the 80s in Brooklyn and in the 90s in Staten Island. We moved out there when I was 11. The South Shore of Staten Island, as compared to like the Lower East Side of Manhattan, there's maybe a 15-mile spread, but it's like entirely different worlds, And so... And also it's so provincial there that I feel like from neighborhood to neighborhood, like Bensonhurst has a personality and Bay Ridge has and it's like someone from Bensonhurst can be like, yeah, but you're from fucking Bay Ridge. And you're like, I'm like, that's like 4 blocks that way.
Yeah.
So I think that there is no, just like there is no unified, I think like Georgian personality or there is no, I don't know if there's I guess like a culturally agreed upon stereotypical like New York thing, but I don't think it's actually one thing at all. It's like 5 million things.
Yeah. New York tends to be, my family's from New York, and but we moved to, my parents grew up in Pennsylvania, or my dad grew up in Pennsylvania, and so they assimilated extremely hard into very waspy Pennsylvania culture.
Sure.
And so when my wife met me, she was used to New York Jews who are when I think of New York, I think of that.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I kind of feel like if you grew up, especially in an outer borough, but I guess in Manhattan, everything's right on top of each other. But Manhattan's like its own. Like, I grew up talking about going to Manhattan as like the city. Mm-hmm. I didn't think of we were like if I met someone that grew up in fucking Harlem, I was like, you're from the city. Like, that's crazy. Who the hell's actually born in Manhattan?
Right. I'm imagining you with like a piece of wheat.
Like Axl Rose in the beginning of the Welcome to the Jungle video. Wow. No, but I do think that, I think that growing up in Bay Ridge, it was kind of like you are sort of like you are like honorary. I was Irish Catholic, but you're a little honorary Jew, honorary Italian, honorary, there was like a Chinese community around us. There was like, and now that neighborhood I still kind of live close by there. I've moved around a bunch and have come back there, but that neighborhood is like, parts of it are like totally deeply Yemeni or other areas like Middle Eastern or Northern African areas. And like, it's an interesting thing going on there right now because it's like the old school Irish Italian people with this new school Middle Eastern influence, and there's like Sunset Park is all Puerto Rican, but everything's like 2 miles away from one another. So you kind of either like, there are people in those neighborhoods that don't evolve or adapt to that and just kind of hate all those people forever living a block away from you, or you just kind of like become honorary everything, and everybody's just sort of like figuring out how to not piss in each other's backyard. Sometimes literally, but yeah. Sure. So I don't know. I feel like my experience of being a New York person, what I know is myself is like, this is how I've always talked. I was in 4th grade and I was at a sleepover and this kid's mom was like, "Where in the Midwest are you from?" And I was like, "I'm really from funny. Around the corner." Like, I don't know. I don't have the like fucking, that's just not really in there. But I'm from there, and it's not an affectation or whatever. So I kind of feel like, I don't know. I don't know. There's a million different New Yorks, and Bay Ridge is one of them, and I don't know.
When I was in grad school, I did this project where, sorry, I'm trying to like distill this into like 3 sentences so that it doesn't take up too much time. I did a project where I looked at the trajectories of like a number of philosophy professors all the way back to the founding of the discipline, which came out of a religion department. It came out of religion studies in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. And if the trajectories were that you were wealthy and went to Ivy League schools, you always stayed. If you went to Ivy League schools for undergrad, you went to Ivy League schools for grad school, and you taught in Ivy League schools, and you rarely ever went out of there. And there was a reason why I said that I started on this. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get back to it at some point.
I love when that happens.
It really, I was like, oh.
It's gone.
I started saying it. I'm like, this is going to make so much sense.
I love it.
And then in the attempt to try to distill the entire thing down to...
Your brain was like, closed for business.
Wait, what was the last thing you said? I swear to God, I will...
The last thing I said? I think it was
about...
She sits alone. The last thing I said, I think it was that there are a million New Yorks and Bay Ridge is one of them, which is not especially profound, but... I don't know. You could roll it back and like.
No, I was just trying to think about like the idea of like there being all these like the reputation, the idea of reputation, the reputation of New York or the reputation of any area that you grow up in, is not the reality. Mm-hmm. And reputation has a long tail of decay. So this is why I was talking about the things, because Harvard has a certain kind of reputation, right? Or Ivy League schools have a certain reputation about being good, but that's not the reality. That's not necessarily the reality.
There's no like objectively right.
When I did this study, you could look at like, oh, well, there was a point in time when Harvard had fantastic professors, and they do have some, but also like it's a school that produced fucking war criminals and murderers and just terrible people also as well. So just because it once was like and it still is probably an extremely great place to, I'm not like trying to, but like there are like the idea of reputation, the idea of like the reputation in New York was like probably the 1920s, right? That idea of like the tenement Jew that still stands in for what New York is. Or like when I think of...
Which is really kind of nutty now.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's like so not... Yeah.
Literally 100 years later, but that's what we think of when we think of New York.
Or the 70s, like Times Square falling apart. It's like, no, it's sort of like not the vibe anymore. Anyway.
Yes, it's now like Outback Steakhouse and an M&M store or whatever.
And an M&M store.
Yeah. We were literally there 5 days ago.
Literally overlooking it in horror. But yeah. I did grow up there.
But yeah, so we all have. It's so weird because you have this thing in your head, this beacon, North Star, whatever you want, of what the place you grew up in is supposed to be like, and then you have your own actual lived-in experience of it. And there's always like not always, but like I think depending on how much dissonance there is between your experience and the North Star of the reputation of the place you grew up in, is how much you feel like you belong in a certain place, probably.
Yeah. Which is interesting because I where I still live now, I don't feel like I belong.
I was just going to, go ahead. I was just going to say, I'll say after you. Yeah.
But yeah, that's just a thought that popped to my head. Like, it's very much, I love where I live because there's parking, and you can get a nice house for not as much money as if you lived in the city, and it's very safe. And but it's also wildly frustrating. I travel so much, so I'm in cities and with the people, more often than not. But when I'm in that area, I'm always like driving around going like, this is just absolutely insane. 16-year-olds and $50,000 raised, trucks and the F-350s. And I was actually talking about with my dad about this the other day too. He's like, all those kids, those are the people who used to piss you off the most. We're like the really privileged, rich redneck. I do not like a rich redneck. And there's just this pompousness to it in its ignorance. And it's so, it's such a bubble that, like, here's an example. We're pulling out of my neighborhood working on Bad Books, and literally outside of my neighborhood, there's a tent with people there standing, and they're selling Trump shirts. Now, I get on and people are buying them because they love them. And so, but then I get on an airplane and I come here and I'm on my way to the hotel and I see 4 people in a "Fuck Trump" t-shirt. It's just a totally different bubble.
You're trading bubbles. That's the problem with what's happening now, I think, is that to some extent we don't have to go there. But it's a lot of bubbles that don't intersect very well.
Going to Toronto for me was really eye-opening, and I remember then coming back to the school, and my parents put me in a private Christian school, and taking Georgia history in the 8th grade, and my teacher, Mrs. White, amazingly,
very on brand.
I remember her talking about slavery, and in my mind, of course, this was like unfathomably terrible, could not be described as a worse thing that could happen, and it was talked about with sort of this nonchalant thing, and not like encouraging it, but certainly not like, and I remember raising my hand and going like, what are you talking about? Like, and the thing that she would say was, well, they had slaves in the Bible, like Moses had slaves, I'm like, so,
there's other stuff in there too that we might know. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing that and I know there are lots of cultural reasons, and maybe if you have some thoughts on it, that we are in the pickle we're in. But when it comes to, like, I've read the Jesus parts of the Bible, and I'm like, oh, this is something we should all follow. Yes, I buy into this. And then it's weird to me how certain groups get stuck on like one sentence that's strangely worded.
It's terrible.
And then they're like, no dogs. We can't own dogs. I mean, I'm just using a stupid example so we don't have to.
Well, that's in my opinion, that's man ruining something and using it for their own power and their own gain. And I think that ultimately comes from fear, and wanting control. And so I'm the same way. Like, throughout my faith, I had to realize that I wasn't going to dictate my faith on how the people who claim to believe some of the things that I believe were acting, or how they were portraying themselves, or what they were doing. And once I could get there and realize that everyone's flawed, and but what I believe isn't represented by a person, it became easier for me.
And I think that that's a pitfall that is available to and present in all the human folly of applying itself to religion. It's not specific or endemic to Christianity. Every available faith has its places where people get obsessed with one weirdly worded sentence and derive way too much meaning or too little meaning or whatever. And that's also, by the way, not only the province of exclusively religion, but any other thing that people wrap their lives around. And I don't think it has to dictate your individual experience through it.
Correct.
I also was thinking before when you were talking, because earlier we were talking about the similarities and differences and like I don't know, buffet style Irish Catholic outer borough upbringing, and like what Andy was describing, but a very profound similarity where I felt like you were just talking and I could replace the words. It would be like, Mad Libs or whatever, is like the rich redneck. So when I lived in Staten Island, 11 to 17 years old, thank God there was this weird little pocket of like sort of like DC influenced hardcore punk rock kids like Fugazi. There's like kids that brought in bands from, it was like 1995, like people would come in from out of state and play on Staten Island in the city, like Quicksand or
oh,
weird, really weird. But outside of this fist of people, all the kids I went to junior high school with and high school with were actively living in New York City, rich, many of them rich from things that were like tangentially connected to the mob, which was kind of weird, and flaunted their ignorance, pretty much like, you know, they're teenagers, maybe they grew out of it, but like racist.
Yeah. There were guys at my school who would have the Confederate flag on their truck, and no one said anything.
These dudes would have had that if they were in Georgia.
Yeah, totally.
What these dudes were like, they were the kids that we were and not that I was, you know, I was a kid, but I do remember you feel things. And also I was a kid who was around like, whether it was Nirvana and REM initially, and then these punk rock kids that were like Fugazi and feeding you all this shit. I remember being at a basketball game at my high school. There was one black kid in our class, Carl Jackman. I went to an all-boys Catholic school on Staten Island, and we were playing Ron Artest's team, Christ the King, I think, and they beat us like 99 to 34. Yeah, and he scored like 60 points or something.
Incredible.
And so what does the group of 800 white kids have left to them at that point but like yelling epithets, racial epithets at these kids? Carl Jackman's sitting there. And I remember being frozen in fear, like doing nothing, but being frozen in fear. And I remember vividly this one kid whose name I won't say, but turning and looking at Carl and going like, not like you, Carl.
Right.
And I was like, that's not in wherever the fuck you think that's happening. That's on Staten Island in New York City. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So like, and those were the kids that always drove me the craziest too. And I still sometimes when I go there to see my mom, I'm 39 years old, and there's still a part of me when I'm riding on the train that thinks I'm 15, like waiting for those
dudes
kids
to
descend. Yeah.
It's funny that music ends up being the lifeline there of like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, like there's just this thing, and all of a sudden when you discover that there's other people that are listening to this thing, this secret, you know, that's like, oh, you like Built to Spill too?
Oh, dude. Yeah.
Well, it's insane. I think we're all around the same age, but like growing up, I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
That was the thing that there was a certain, because this was before the internet really, there was a certain amount of discovery that you had to do and work to find something. Like when I went from Nirvana to Pavement because of the No Alternative soundtrack.
Yeah. Well, me, it was the review of Crooked Rain in Rolling Stone. I read it, and then I went to Tape World and sat in the mall and listened to it on a cassette player. I was like, you can sing like that on an album, and people will buy it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're allowed?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
You're allowed. I was like, because Nirvana still sounded, compared to that, Nirvana sounded like they had their shit together.
Totally.
Pavement was like, this sounds like it's a disaster, but it's beautiful.
It's falling apart at any time.
Yes. But then the springboard from there was to the Silver Jews, and that you had to do a lot of work to find the Silver Jews.
Was that American Water? Was that record?
At the time, no. I think Starlight Walker was out when I first discovered them, but the Arizona record was like the thing that was like recorded on a boombox or something.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like shit.
Well, yeah, and it's like, oh, music, like, and then there's just kind of like you start to like realize that you're part of like a group that has nothing to do with geography.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, that was so exciting is like, and a little scary, honestly, just starting touring as a like 18-year-old.
Yeah, you were young.
You know, from, you know, this Christian family, and just like meeting so many different people and loving those people. When you and I met, I think we're closer in our sort of beliefs and areas than we probably were then. It was a little bit more, we were younger and whatever, but but like we were opposites when we met each other, but there was this like deep love, and I think understanding, it's part of my childhood is like accepting and loving people regardless. My parents were always teaching that. It was like never an exclusivity to life. It was like, you love people, that's what we're told to do. And it's been rewarding. And the music side of it was like you were talking about, just trying to find things. My brother-in-law, Robert, who's also the partner in Bad Books in Manchester, we would go to Tower Records at midnight on Monday night, and it would open, and then once it got to 12:01, you could go in and ask them to go in the back and go find you the album, so that you could listen to it for an hour driving home. And something so special about, when we get a new album of ours, the smell, you hold it, the unpackaging it, the
tactility of that.
I could open a CD in like 2 minutes flat, it's just very, and they were tricky.
So there's something, there's something gained by the fact that music is, that you can just go on your computer and download something or on Bandcamp, or
Ubiquitous
Spotify or
access,
whatever. But the thing that's lost is that tactility, is the physical object, the art, like there's something about that piece of art that I miss. I miss a booklet. I miss designing booklet. I miss, when I was playing music, and I miss just like the holding up and the art and seeing what they've done
and reading it. And seeing who they thanked.
Yes.
And
where
seeing
they
who
made
engineered,
it.
seeing where they, it's so, that's what Wikipedia has turned into now. Which I pay $6 every year when they ask me.
Yes.
They're like, "Do you want to do it again?" I'm like, I do. I use this every day.
Thank you.
There's pros and cons. There's like, I have a side project that I did from 06 to 2012. That was 3 albums, a trilogy, a story. I print that up every few years, 1,000 vinyl. If it's nice, it's 4,000 vinyl because it's a 4 vinyl set. But I print that up and I sell it. And I do that 1,000 copies every whatever. But because it's on Spotify, because it's on Apple Music, one thing I realized financially that's nice about it, and they still have a long way to go to making that fair across the board, but it's a stream. It's something constant where if someone is just listening, if they buy a CD from you, it's $10, and then they listen to that CD forever, and where this is more like they're giving you pennies each time they're listening, a fraction of a cent every time they hear a song, which is nice when you look at the, it's 2019 and I'm still making a little bit of change, from this thing that I have put zero effort into, for 7 years. What's missed is the attention span, the beauty of like, when I would go to Tower Records and buy, let's say, A Ghost Is Born, which is an album, and I remember that, and a shout out Mike Kinsella, an Owen EP called The EP, which was fantastic. But like me and Rob would sit in the car, and if we got to our house before the record was over, we're not getting out of the car.
No,
you're listening to this album, And there's something about that is gone now, that when you get in I think the car is such a gorgeous, beautiful place to listen to music, and now that has turned into podcasts. Even for myself, that's more of something I can like listen to and really focus on, because when you had a CD in your car, you turn your car on and it starts playing.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh yeah, okay, cool, I'm back in.
Yeah,
there's no
it's
end
immersive.
To it,
Yeah, I think, and also there's an aspect of, and I always worry that you start to lapse into like crotchety old man territory with this, but I do think there's an aspect of, and there's nothing that someone who's 18 years old now can do about this. You just live in the time you live in. It's not like I'm pointing a finger or blaming. I am grateful for the part where I grew up in a time where you actually had to do a little bit more work to find some of that stuff, because I think the act of seeking that was also an important part of it.
Yeah. Now it's Shazam.
It's just, well, also, and I think I can't help but think the ubiquitous access to information and the ubiquitous access to the entirety of recorded music at your fingertips, there's amazing stuff about that, but there's also a numbing quality to that too.
Devalues it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just like everything is like on the same plane. And I think there was something about finding, and again, someone who's 18 could come in here and tell me all the reasons why, and I would be compelled to listen to it. But I know, like, just that Pavement story, that's a romantic story in retrospect. That's literally what happened. I read Rolling Stone because probably like Pearl Jam was on the cover. There was a review. It was such a pivotal, or like a early enough moment for Matador in their ascension, that the label's address was at the bottom of the review. Like, it was fucking Maximum Rock and Roll or something. And it was Rolling Stone. And I remember being like, I have to go hear this music. I'm like sitting on a blue, like, one of those blue benches in a fucking mall with the headphones on, like, while the world was swirling around, listening to Pavement, and then being like, it was all kinds of bands from that point forward that kind of lead to you and me sitting in this room in a very real way. So that's kind of lost.
I had another layer to it as well. Growing up in a Christian house, that was, my folks have also, as people do, grown and loosened up, a little bit. But when you're a pastor's wife and a pastor at a big church in Canada, and my dad was on TV every Sunday. It was like that kind of like church, like at 7 a.m. That was the service that was on television. So he was a public figure, and so it was it was tight when it came to music. Wasn't tight when it came to movies. Dad took me to go see like The Eraser with Arnold Schwarzenegger when I was 8, which I still think is why I write fucked up songs. I tell him this all the time because the opening of that scene is a guy saying fuck and blowing his brains out.
I remember that.
And I remember being like 9, going like, wow, all right. Now that's what I write songs about.
Life is pain.
Yeah, life is pain.
Yeah.
And Arnold's going to save the day.
Yeah.
So when I grew up, they would have these charts. And I don't know if anyone who knows or grew up in a similar situation to me knows exactly what I'm talking about. And if you don't, it's going to sound completely insane. But there were charts, and the chart had all of the secular bands to the left on a graph, and at the top had all of the and had another list of secular bands. And if you liked this band and you followed it on the chart, it would give you your Christian substitute for that genre.
Wow.
So Beastie Boys and Nirvana, and you're like, oh, DC Talk. So for me, there was a very real hunger for this music that I wasn't allowed to have. And so it was like I would take like Wu-Tang Clan album in the 4th grade, 5th grade, which is insane. But like taking the CD from a friend and putting it in the boombox and recording it onto a tape.
Yeah.
So that I could like have it, but like hiding it and not, and my mom has always been a huge music fan, and she now turns me on to music, and like she's an incredible taste. But at the time it was like I couldn't get my hands on it. And then once I could get my hands on it, it was it's still that way for me. I still get giddy, and I think that's a part of why I still love it so much, and like the search for it, and something that moves me deeply.
Yeah. So there's a certain, there's a certain connection here between like the idea of like having to work for something means you're putting some of your ego into that in a way that it means more. Again, we could bring an 18-year-old in here and ask them, and I'm sure, again, like I said, there's a ubiquity. So now it's easy to find music, and it's easy to find listeners for your music and things like that. So there's something good about it.
Yes.
But at the same time, there's like you're losing some of the individuality. You're losing that idea of working for it and putting your ego into it and that kind of stuff.
That's an interesting way to put it. I've never thought about the ego side, but there's a badge to it when you would find something that other people didn't know, and
totally.
It made you feel.
And people were proprietary about that too. Like, I'm the guy who knows shit.
I actually
the
really
comic
like
book
Elliott
guy
Smith,
from The Simpsons. Yeah, absolutely.
You are investing yourself in this band in a way that there's bands I love that I've discovered since I was in high school and since college, I guess, was the real times when you were like discovering these things that I think are wonderful and love very deeply and move me. But there's something missing. There's just something than like going on Bandcamp and seeing like, oh, if you like this artist, you like this artist, and then listening to a couple songs and being like, I do like this artist.
Right.
There's something similar between that and this idea of like, I'm going to use this word. You can correct me, but like something forbidden about finding that music.
That's the way it is. Absolutely, it was forbidden, and that's what made it really sexy and really interesting to me. It was like, oh, I'm gonna go not only listen to this, I'm gonna try this. Like, I'm which is insane. I was having a conversation the other day with my friend Simon from the band Biffy Clyro, and he had a really funny theory about why there aren't a lot of women in bands, like from an early start, that are like in bands, because they're so much smarter than us that they don't have like the absolute insane mind to go, I think like I'm gonna get in a van for a year and like I'm gonna play my songs on stage and people are gonna like it enough that like this will work out for me. The chances are so slim, but there's something about that. There's like this feeling of like, I believe I can do it,
Someone needs to hear this.
Right, totally.
I think with the forbidden thing, there was religion in my home, and I did grow up in an environment where I was a practicing Catholic for the first while, and church and sacraments and Sunday school and religious education and all of that, I didn't have that chart. That's amazing. But there was and my mom liked 60s music, liked radical, like Phil Oakes and Buffy St. Marie, stuff that was sort of like challenging. But when I grew up, and for me, it was like the hip hop stuff that was around was like if I heard like NWA or whatever, but it was like cock rock. It was like Guns N' Roses and Poison and Motley Crue, and that was the line. Like my mom, I got like the Columbia House 12 cassettes for a penny thing, and I got
Still paying it off
today, yeah. And I like loaded up on that music, and she came home and or when I was at school one day, she read the liner notes to Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood, and it was all pictures of them with like these latex clad women. The songs are very sexual or druggy.
Yep.
And she was like, "You can't have this. You're 9, And I remember that made it. That was like the forbidden thing and the sexy thing that you said. That was like the introduction on some level to being seduced by the thing I can't have.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I was like, it made me like, yeah, okay, James Taylor songs are nice. I like them more even now.
Yeah.
But at the time I was like, I don't give a shit about that. I want to know what like
Same.
Vince Neil is
Yes.
doing at the fucking Whiskey A Go-Go at whatever time.
Dad
Yeah.
listened to Chicago, James Taylor, and the Firm soundtrack.
The Firm soundtrack kills me.
And he loves it. I got him that for Christmas a few years ago, the double CD with the extra bonuses.
So
he loves
good.
it. It's all piano.
There's something. Okay, there's also something. I don't know how to put it together, but like this. Growing up, there's some nexus here, and I'll try to define it, and we'll see if we can figure out something about it. But like, my temple, a lot of the music was written in the '60s, and so I'm growing up with like
The music you guys sang?
Yeah. Like if you had a psalm or something and you were going to sing it, there was like a traditional. We were Reformed Jews. There's a traditional way to sing it, but then also like they updated the music, and the last time they really updated it was in the '60s. So it's all folk influenced.
That's
so
Catholic Church too, I think. By the way,
is it really?
the ones
Yeah.
I went to, yeah.
A lot of the music got updated in the '60s.
When they had the performance on Staten Island, it was acoustic guitar and 2 female vocalists.
Yeah.
It was like an Indigo Girls concert in church.
Yeah. And I grew up loving like '60s folk
Sounds
music.
amazing.
It was pretty good, actually. Some of the songs were pretty good.
That stuff is it's fantastic. And then my parents listened to musicals, Barbra Streisand and Billy Joel.
Yeah.
And there's this there's the music I like, and there's also a forbidden world. And my version of your Motley Crue was Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood
Right.
Sugar Sex
There you
Magic.
go.
Right.
Where I'm like, what? First of all, it hit when I was like hitting puberty,
Right.
around there, and I'm just like, and so it's like they're singing about sex, and you're just like, what is this?
Right.
And you can sing about it too.
Right.
So somewhere in between all those 4 different things is me
Yeah.
becoming forming my identity.
Totally.
And I assume something similar for you guys then.
Yeah. It was, I mean, for me as well, realizing that the music wasn't bad or sinful. It was like, I remember
music.
having a thought of like, I bet the Beatles makes God really, really happy.
Right.
Right. No matter what they're singing about or what they're doing, like that's just that, if you believe in a creator,
Hearing that
then
stuff.
that's been created and that's
Yeah.
incredible, and there's just sort of this like, there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, it's more real, and I think the same thing about the music that I grew up with. Church in the South was incredible. Songs like Be Thou My Vision and It Is Well With My Soul. Like you could play that song on an acoustic guitar right now and bring me to tears. They're just incredibly well-written, beautiful songs. A lot of times from really dark places by really dark, troubled men and women.
Like Dark Night of the Soul kind of place.
I think it's Be Thou My Vision, which is an incredible hymn. But I think that there's a great story about that guy who wrote that. And this woman comes on this train and she's singing the song. And this bum, reeks, and he's, obviously he's drunk, and he tells her to stop, singing it. The song's terrible. And she says, what do you know? Who are you? You have your life, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I wrote it, it's my song. I love that. And I love things. I love honesty in any form. The realness of it, where it's like, There's a great line in that song where he says, "Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love." I love that. That's real. That's what you feel especially if you have faith. That there's a feeling of like constant questioning and constant wandering, and wondering. So it always struck the chord with me with the realness of it, and that I could find that other places, because once it started to get to contemporary Christian music, I was checking out.
Well, because you can't have. How can you know the strength of your faith if you're not willing to doubt it and ask the questions? Willing might even be the wrong word if doubt isn't just present.
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, Andy, it seems religion is deeper for you. It's faith. Is it the same? You said you grew up Catholic, but is there a deeper faith for you, or is it just like I never grew up with? I just don't have whatever that feeling is inside me. I think I miss it. I think I need to mourn it in some way or figure it out. But it's not there.
Yeah.
I do not identify as a Catholic. No, I identify culturally as an Irish Catholic because there's just so much in there that comes out that I'm like, well, I could, no matter how far I get from that, that's going to be in me forever.
Thumbprint on your forehead.
Yeah, and some of that is some of it's like beautiful and rich, and there's like a community aspect to that I will always identify with. I drop my daughter off at daycare sometimes, and the church I received like communion and reconciliation, and my brother was married in is 2 blocks away, and there's an 8:30 service, and I'll sometimes just go sit in the service, and that's maybe also an amends to self about years of like what I would call a more like kind of reactionary atheism, that I'm sort of like, that's not how I feel either. So I don't need to I can go sit in the church and not burst into flames. I can sit there and be a part of this. And I also don't need to receive communion because that's not something that I feel a connection to in that specific ritualistic way. So to answer your question, I would not say that I'm a person who is, I think all these words are, tenuous, but I am not somebody who I think has a religious quality to his faith. I would not even really know. I guess I would be somebody that you would, if you had to classify it, it's agnostic, but I do feel very differently than I felt when I was 15, which is when I remember coming home from Catholic school one day, and this nun, Sister Grigina, drew a mountain and in different colors of chalk drew up the side of the mountain and said, there are many ways to God. And that's a beautiful thing. And for some reason, when she said that, that was the day that I was like, I don't believe in the Catholic one. It was a beautiful thing. It wasn't the many things I'd heard that were lacerating, that didn't drive me away from it. It was when this one person opened up the aperture enough to be like, this doesn't have to be the one.
Right.
I was like, oh, okay. And I got in the car with my dad, and he was like, how was school? And I was like, I don't think I believe any of that.
Right.
And he was like, okay, well, as long as you live at home, you have to go to church. And I was like, all right. So I went to church every Sunday till I was 17, and then started fumbling around for the next 21 years through this path to wherever I am now. So that's a lot of words. What do I believe in? I don't know, but I know that I'm open, I'm listening, I'm seeking, and I know I'm not the end of it. So I don't know. That's and when I try to wrestle the world to my ideations, the world tends to kick dirt in my face. Yeah, so I'm trying to just kind of be open. But I don't know that I don't know what that means with respect to architecture or the afterlife. I don't know that. But I think I'm asked. All this stuff moves around in me in some way and comes out through the various explorations I've engaged with to this point, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, but there is some kind of spark of some feeling of the divine in some way.
I think there's a spark of the awareness that there's a mystery to being a person that I can't crack on my own.
Yeah.
And that the 2 iterations to which I was most adherent as an adolescent and then as a young adult, which were essentially Catholic atheist, did not avail me of more closeness to those answers. That is also not to say that there are not times I hear, it's funny, just to wrap this up for me. So I still feel this connection to Irish Catholic outer borough New Yorker. And then there's also times I'll hear some like staunch atheist intellectual talking on about some subject, and I'm listening to them, and I'm like intellectually nodding my head at a lot of what they're saying, but spiritually I'm like, you sound fucking miserable. And so that's not where I want my life to be either, is like the certainty of either feels a little confining to me. And I don't know that I believe faith is about certainty anyway, but I'm just sort of like figuring out what that means, and I'll probably be figuring out what that means for me until I'm dead. And that's kind of okay to me, because that means I'm still looking.
Yeah.
But that's the closest I can get to answering that question in a legible way, because it's not totally legible to me.
Yeah.
But
Again, I think there's some amorphousness we're all trying to like define in some way. So I don't think there is like a language that you can. I don't think there's anything that grasps it. I'm also like trying to grasp at how to talk about this.
No, it's good.
And I've been doing this for like a decade.
Yeah.
Where I'm just like, there's a feeling in here. I don't think it's the same. And also like you're also trapped inside your own head.
Yeah.
But that's why I think in some way this feeling of faith or the divine is a connection outside of you.
Yes.
And that's what I'm trapped in this kind of like solipsistic world that I think if you have a feeling of faith, you are not trapped in the same way I am. But who knows, because I'm not inside any of your heads either.
If faith is acts, and if you're like, I don't know, it's like the ways for me to get outside of myself, because I don't know, I have to keep it really simple and like tangible. It's like service. It's like asking, it's like when I'm in a self-pitying pit, asking someone, it's as simple as like asking someone else what's going on with them, trying to show up to do something. I'm going to navigate life imperfectly, and in fact, I'm going to navigate it way less than imperfectly a lot of the time and fuck up my way through parts of it. But the best thing I can do when that happens is try to get closer, is try to do better that day. And that usually for me is usually connected to like, how do I get outside of myself, and certain things that I've explored in the last 11 to 13 years of my life, just in figuring out my own shit, whatever it would be called, spiritual, emotional work, have been about service.
Yeah.
Service keeps you sober is one thing I heard.
Sure.
And also Aaron Weiss was telling me once about this Christian comic that would say, it was about service in the church. And there was like a funny line where it'd be like, yeah, they always tell me I got a service heart. And I think that just means I'm a sucker, because I'm the guy who's like sweeping up the church. But that guy probably feels closest to God sweeping up the church. Sure. I feel closest to whatever I think that is when I'm like trying to be fucking helpful to someone as imperfectly as I can be. So that's the way to get out of that solipsistic bubble for me, is like...
Yeah.
Well, and I think so much of it is about, from my perspective, and when I talk about it in songs, is not to like be preaching about it. It's supposed to be sung through a lens, and that lens has doubt, and that lens has failure, and that lens has positivity and negativity and questions and pain. It's all over. I love when I've covered a hymn, the one I was just talking about. And if you go look, like I've heard from people who are like, I have zero faith whatsoever, and this song didn't give me any faith, but I love this song. I can feel you on this song, And then there are people that are like, wow, I do have faith, and I love this song. It means a lot to me. Like, there's a power to me, to bring it back to music, that I think is so like universal in that language, that's when I feel God most. That, and like looking into my kids' eyes, that's probably when I feel like closest to it. Where I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm sure you have that feeling, whatever it is. I think everyone, and hopefully it's a shame because most people don't get to feel it probably, but like when you're doing the thing you were supposed to do, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. Like when you're on stage, and when you are in tune. I think a lot of this stuff is like, how do you feel in tune with other people? Right. When you're on stage and you're in the moment in such a way that everyone is in tune with each other, either like who you're performing with, or you in the audience, or something like that, is this kind of. And I think that the if there is like an analogy between faith and between performance, and some, I mean, it's obviously that's kind of where performance comes out of in a real way. So there's a point where this is just banal in the way of saying it. But there, like, I think the deeper thing is that attunement, and how do you attune to other people, and whether you can feel that on your own, that attunement, or whether you need something to attune you.
Totally. And I think that I'm in a specific place where I can feel it in two different ways. There is on stage and being a part of this community that is all they're there for what we're doing, which is incredible. And you just like never get over the gratefulness of that. Like we always talk about, we have a job where people clap before we do anything. It's like, it's insane. But there's also being in a studio and creating something that didn't exist the day before. And that's maybe even for me. And then when that does connect with people, that's such an unbelievable feeling. That's like, wow, this was something that's deeply personal, that I felt connected with the people that I was creating it in the room with. And now it's being accepted and received. And
Right.
I feel like we're so lucky because what we do helps people. And I look at it that way at times, where it's like when you really boil it down to exactly what it is, it's like we're creating art so that people can enjoy it and it can move them and it can shift something. That's an incredible responsibility.
Yeah.
But it also makes me feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's a spiritual feeling for me.
I agree with all that. And I also agree with what you were saying before. And it made me think, and not to sound too cheesy, but like, not only is that about that moment, I was thinking about a couple moments last night, in fact, but where you feel that connection with not just each other, but the people there. It's also when I feel most, when it's at its purest, both the act of creation and the act of performing the creation, it's when I feel most at peace with myself sometimes too.
Absolutely.
And if you're like in alignment, there's a lot of noise in my head. And there are ways to get away from some of the things we're talking about, are ways to kind of like make peace with that noise or try to like funnel that noise.
But there's always a ticker of bullshit.
Yes.
You know?
It's like the lower, that's exactly right. Like across the bottom of the screen.
Of your brain. Yes.
Yeah. And that ticker of bullshit does not show up there are times it shows up during meditation.
There are times it shows up
during
shows.
prayer.
Yeah.
There are times one of our friends once said something amazing to me about performing, where I was like, where were you for that show? And he was like, for like 45 minutes, I was just imagining the Silver Surfer examining Galactus's helmet.
Yes.
And I was like, what?
I totally relate.
Yeah, I know.
I can
Oh
leave.
my God.
Yeah. But there's moments where I'm like really in my, not in myself the way we were talking about before, like in that way that's like piled under mounds and mounds of self-torturous bullshit.
It's almost like there's and there's nothing. Like there's a beauty of the nothingness. I'm sure when you're like performing, there's a feeling when you're on it and it's happening, and it's like,
Time
I don't even
stops.
have to think, you know,
Yeah.
like it's
100%. Yeah. I mean, look, when I'm not in recovery, but I have a lot of friends that are, and there's something about like when you were saying service earlier, if you can't get outside of yourself, what are the things you can do that will force you to attune to these other people?
Force you to.
And it's stuff like that. It's like service. Like, I think the idea of a higher power, and I'm trying to figure out like, what does that mean for me if I don't have this feeling inside of me? How can I? I mean, that's the thing that I've been struggling with lately. Is like, well, what is what do I attune to? How can I attune to the outside world in a meaningful way? I don't have any answers.
I think it's such a subjective thing, and I would only say that I think for me, like as somebody who also struggles with like a defined, I don't know, silhouetted, contoured, composite, higher power, God idea.
how could it be?
Right. How could it be? Our brains can't. That's how I feel as well.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like unsure when. Oh, not unsure. Then that's something that's either both about growing up in the way I grew up with the kind of no bullshit people I grew up around, and then also the like later iteration of that around like lean meat punk hardcore kids, which has their own bullshit, but there was some amount of suspicion to certainty.
Sure.
Some amount of like, anytime anybody's in there telling me like, I know, I'm like, you don't fucking know anything.
White Jesus.
Right. But I do think for me, what I know is a higher power than me, inarguably, and I know reality is a tricky word, but it's reality. And the times where I'm like at a distance from reality, or I'm bullshitting myself about reality, or I'm in some kind of negotiation with reality, or I'm trying to be its master, reality often jumps up and smacks me in the fucking mouth and reasserts who's in control. And it's not me. I'm in control of what I do. And when I'm hiding or I'm trying to like parcel out, I get pain for that. And I get buried in self-pity for that. And I get distanced from whatever that presence is for that. So I don't know. For me, there's like a secular, spiritual path to that that's kind of about like, what's real? And usually if you have good enough mirrors in your life at a certain point, you know when you're bullshitting yourself, and you know when you're bullshitting. And there's some point where you just got to, for me, part of the job is keeping close to those mirrors.
Totally.
And when I push those mirrors away, I get to be very sick.
Yeah.
I don't have to be drunk to be very sick. I have not drank or done drugs in 11 years, but I drank and did drugs for a long time before that. And I drank and did drugs in an abusive way for a long time before that. And part of this stuff is stuff that I've cobbled together over the years from some of that stuff. But
Yeah.
I don't have to be on, I had like a memory the other day of like a train spotting moment that was kind of dark, where like the coke dealer brought his kid to my house at 3:00 in the morning.
Wow.
And I was like, as soon as they left, I was like crying, but not crying enough to not do it and call him again the next day. That's not happening today, but I can still be plenty sick if I don't want to like look at reality. That was a very marked way to not look at reality.
Yep.
That was like, I can't
Quick
look
solution.
at reality.
Right.
Yeah, this is now more like, I can, do I want to? How free do I want to be? And the days that I want to be free are the days you pick up the phone and ask somebody, how are you doing?
Yeah.
I think there's something
So-
for me about the brokenness. Like there's an inherent brokenness, I think, to everyone. I think we're
Yes.
broken. I think we come out broken. And I think until you can admit that and go, I need help. I need something else. I cannot fix this for myself. When I realized that what my faith was going to sort of shape into, that it was not based on works and not based on the kind of like dude I am, because that's not getting me anywhere. Like there's no prize for that. And like you're saying, when left to my own devices, you can become sick. You become in a place. So for me, the idea of throwing my hands up and going, help, like I'm not the one who can fix this. That gives me peace. And and that's an important part, for me.
Yeah, asking for help is the powerlessness is powerful.
Yeah. And admitting it and going like,
yes.
Because I always was skeptical of the people who like the blind faith. I admire it, and I actually am jealous of it.
Sure.
There's a bit.
Be nice.
My dad's not. I don't feel this way about my dad. I really admire his faith. He truly, 100%. There's no there doesn't seem to be a doubt. Like the way that his brain works, it is what it is, and it is a beautiful thing. I'm more of a searcher, and wondering and seeing what that whole thing's about.
That's what's united us, by the way, from the day we met. Mm-hmm. That's like the thing to ask the beginning. Like, however the explorations were moved around in, I think that was very mutually identified. Like, these are two people that are looking for something.
Yes. Yeah.
And that made the differences, to me, wholly irrelevant.
Absolutely. Because who cares?
I did not care.
Right,
It was
exactly.
like, I don't care.
Where does the searching come in? I imagine there's when you move from Georgia to Canada.
Yeah.
I imagine that's the first bit of otherness that kind of starts pushing you apart.
Yep.
Where does it come in for you, Kevin?
Well, I think you can have that sensibility. Like, I don't mean to over-ascribe to things. Like, there's all right, there are certain inclinations you have. Like, I was a kid who was in the 4th grade and was I read Edgar Allan Poe my teacher gave me this Poetry USA book that had Carl Sandburg and Emily Dickinson. And I was really drawn to this stuff and writing stories and sensitive to that stuff, whatever language you want to use. And then getting to eventually Nirvana, Michael Stipe, people like that were a model of they weren't swaggering hip hop dudes. They weren't swaggering rock star dudes. They were kind of emblematic of some other weird iteration of what a man could be like. And there was a sensitivity in that stuff that I was very attracted to. And I wasn't living where Andy was living, but like I said, you can have provincial ideas that kind of put a stranglehold on your development, or can, anywhere, and you can have them in outer borough New York just as easily as any other place. And so the seeking, kind of seeing, I remember very vividly, and I'm not advocating this, but there was this was a 27-year-old man when he died. He was a very troubled person and a drug addict, and also somebody who was like really traumatized and unwell. And I'm not saying Kurt Cobain was anything other than that, but I was grateful that was like the primary rock star around when I was a kid, and not like some sort of bullshit machismo swaggering nonsense. I remember seeing a sticker on my dad was a cop. His dad was a cop. Two of my uncles were cops.
Oh,
multiple cousins of mine are cops. I have a lot of respect for all of that and what they did and how they got in there. I also have a lot of healthy, skeptical questioning about a lot of what that apparatus serves as now. Anyway, there was a bumper sticker Kurt Cobain had on his guitar that said, "Vandalism is as beautiful as a rock in a cop's face." And I was 12 years old, and I was like, why would someone want to throw a rock in my dad's face? Right. But that led to investigating, like, well, why would someone want to throw a rock in a cop's face? And you can make the argument there are plenty of reasons to not throw a rock in a cop's face. And if you grow up in a certain way, there's plenty of reasons to be like, yeah, fuck yeah, I want to throw a rock in a cop's face. That's where questioning came in for me, was through some of this stuff like, what are they talking about when they're talking about this stuff? That's not something but also my dad came from the information he came from, but if I ever said anything like quasi-ignorant, he was very quick to be like, that's not how we fucking do things.
Same.
And my mom was a proper, like, the joke between my dad and my mom was that my dad would have been like, my mom would have been like a hippie protesting in Central Park, and my dad would have been the guy with the baton, like beating her friends up,
right,
when they were like at that appropriate age. And I think she softened him,
right.
And I think, he got about as soft as he was ever going to get. But so the questioning came for me from like the dissonance between the environment you're in, and also like growing up in Catholicism, but then hearing people that were not questioning it just from within the faith, whether it was like Jesuits or whatever, but then people who were questioning all of it from outside of any traditional structured faith. The seeking came from those questions kind of percolating in my brain, and that might have come from an initial sensitivity to language and poetry. I don't know, but yeah.
Well, I'm just, what the things I try to find on the show are like, what's the stuff in your childhood that gave you that space, that to move apart from culture and from the mainstream culture. Again, whatever this thing is that we're calling the North Star of mainstream culture, to become creative people, in your own right.
I remember going to a show in Athens, Georgia. I was 16, and my best friend's brother was playing in a band, and they got us into the Caledonia Lounge, which was 18 and up, historic venue right underneath the 40 Watt, which is an even more historic venue. You start at the Caledonia, and you hopefully make it to the 40 Watt. Yeah. That's like the home of REM, and and a lot of really great music for a really long time. I remember walking in, and my now brother-in-law, amazingly, it was his band, Breakheart Beat, and he snuck us in the back. They didn't go on till 1:00 in the morning, and I just remember looking around at it, and it was a similar feeling to like the Toronto experience of going like, or maybe even moving back to Atlanta and going, oh, I think about things differently than everybody else here.
Yeah,
I remember being in that shitty club and going like, no one at school has any idea that this is going on.
Right.
This is a whole other universe, and I want to be a part of it, and I want to put my name in the hat, and give this a go. And that was a big turning point for me, of like being able to tangibly see something that now, if I had to go play the Caledonia, I would do nothing but complain for the weeks leading up to it, and I will admit I'm snobbish that way now. But like, there's nothing more I wanted than to go climb into a van and go play hot dog stands across the country for no money. It was like that was my purpose,
Was there, the way you say that also, like, it's there's a mirror in me of like moving to Los Angeles where it went from a passion and a something meaningful inside me to now a career that I now have to support.
That's a big shift. It's real.
A very huge shift, and it shifts the way you think sometimes.
100%. Well, the stakes are higher.
Your livelihood depends on it.
Right. Yeah, I think with children now, even forcing that into an even more like, oh man, like, this, not only are they going to have, I think about my art in that way a ton now, where it's like there's albums that they're going to be able to listen to. And I love that what we do lives on. There's something that's will be there, but it also lives on, videos of me yelling at somebody on YouTube. They're there, like it's,
yeah. Yep.
There's a lot of that too. So it changes the way you look at it. For me, it's been a really positive influence, mostly because I value the time that I'm working more. Like it's less like, let's go to the studio and
dick around.
Just make stuff till 4 a.m. It's like, no, if I'm going in, I like really want to be intent about what I'm doing and focusing on. And if I'm going to spend an hour writing a song, it better be a really, really great song.
Because that hour could be spent a lot of different ways.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
One last thing, Andy, you said, I just wanted to connect something earlier on. You said your father didn't want you to be a pastor's son.
Yes.
And I'm still curious about what that meant.
Sure. And I understand it more and more every year that goes by, but he was a pastor's kid. And so he experienced what that was like. My grandfather was a pastor. And there's pressure to it, and especially in high school. And I think he knew, and my mom knew, that if I probably wasn't going to be the best pastor's son. I remember one of the first shows my parents came to as Manchester, and I had a song where I said shitty in it or something. I cursed it, like really like upset my dad, and it was like, oh, my son. And he looked at it as, oh no, like we've lost him, and I noticed a lot of that and started separating myself from the school I was and the people that went to the school that I went to, other than the small little group, like we said, the fist of people, that liked the music and whatever. But one of my first experiences of ever performing, and this will tie back to the pastor's kid thing, was on the worship team of my high school. I was like in 10th grade, and every Wednesday there was chapel, and it was the first time I would like play with a band and sing and learn what it was like to be on stage. Now, that only lasted for me about 6 months because, like I said, if I wasn't going to be a really great pastor's son, I definitely wasn't going to be the beaming example that the school wanted for its worship leader. Right. I was, go to the park and smoke cigarettes and, cover myself in Axe body spray and hope nobody notices kind of thing, And it was that kind of pressure, and I think my dad didn't want me to have that type of pressure. He has since become a pastor again, and just a couple years ago started pastoring a church in Marietta, right near where his first church was started. But I'm really grateful to him for that, because if I was a pastor's kid, my dad always talked about margins. You never want to give yourself narrow margins. If you look at the piece of paper where the margin is on a piece, you want that to be as wide and as tall as possible. You don't want to give yourself a ceiling. There shouldn't be anything that's restricting you from achieving something that you want to achieve. And I wouldn't have been able to feel as free that way, I think, if I was seen with that badge of, oh, he's the kid of the guy who is telling everybody what to do. And if his son's not in line, then why, then what's, just the whole drama and politics of it. And he was gracious enough to take me and my sister out of that.
I mean, have you guys ever talked about how you are the break in the line? You said you come from a line of cops and you come from a line of pastors.
I was thinking about it when you were talking about that.
I feel like I'm still sort of in the line in a way. Like, I think what I do is really different, but my grandmother and grandfather, like I said, her funeral was 2 days ago, and she was 90, an amazing life, but she was a recording artist. They released 35 gospel albums. Their band was called the Joy Makers with my grandfather. They were, and I have her 60-year-old Baldwin piano now in my living room, and it's like, I feel a deep connection still to whatever version they were doing. I think I'm doing my own weird version of that thing. And that feels good too, because it feels correct.
Yeah. And my dad had 6 kids. My younger brother and I are with my mom, and his first 4 were with a different, he was older than my mother, and it's a long thing. But none of the 6 of us became police. none of the six of us, as far as I know, were especially compelled to become police. It wasn't really.
And I felt the same way about ministry. Like I was like, I never felt that calling.
No,
you know?
no. But I do know, like, in subtler ways. My dad was left-handed till he was 6, and the nuns beat him up about it and made him a righty because the left hand was the devil's hand.
Sinister.
My dad was
It's unbelievable.
He drew. He was a sketch artist kind of guy, and then like that was like beaten out of him. And later in life, he became like, I have files of it. Like he would draw for my little nieces and nephews and stuff. I actually have some of them up on like the walls of my house. But like there was art in there. My mom has always sung songs and been involved with music. Her dad was a construction worker that worked on the Verrazano Bridge, but he, like Irish immigrant from Newfoundland, as is my grandmother. My grandfather wrote poetry, sang songs. My grandmother, till she was 90, I would go visit her in Brooklyn, and she would sit on the floor with a Casio keyboard in her right hand and like pick out melodies to songs. I'm in there. Mm-hmm. That didn't come from nowhere. That stuff all came, but I didn't become in a different way. I mean, I don't know that I don't think that I could apply policing to anything about what I'm doing at the moment with my work, but all of that stuff. And also, like I said, you can remove yourself from, I would not classify myself as a practicing Catholic, but the things I grew up in around the community of Irish Catholicism in Brooklyn, that's going to be a part of me. Hopefully if I'm around a long time, I'll identify anytime I see a movie about those people.
Right.
I'm like leaning into it because that makes sense to me.
Do you think that your dad felt pressure to be a cop?
I think that
Right.
Well, I think that when he grew up in Park Slope, which is now Shishi, but it was not Shishi in 1935. Mm-hmm. 6 of them in a 1-room apartment kind of vibe, Irish tenement thing.
Right.
And his dad was a cop.
Right.
His dad was a cop. And then his older brother was a cop. And my dad had like scholastic aspirations, but didn't go to school.
Right. Well, I think there's a big cultural thing there too, where it's like, my dad was really the start of the shift. He had a relationship with his father, and we knew my grandfather, saw him often, but he also was very critical of my dad, and he could never live up to what my dad was doing. And or my dad could never live up to whatever. But my dad was more successful than my grandfather, and he would pastor larger churches, and he did more. And that, I think my grandfather hated that, and that broke my dad. I mean,
it's complicated.
So when my dad started going to therapy when I was 2, because of some really difficult conversation that his father said something terrible. There's a story he has about he's sitting at his desk at the church, and his grandfather says, I don't believe what you're doing, and this isn't going to whatever. My dad crawls under the table and cries. And that started a shift that I am so grateful happened, because my dad, he stopped the cycle. He was like, okay, we're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. My kids are going to feel loved. My dad has, and he said it our entire lives, I want you to be better than me. Right. I want you to do more than me. I want you to be more successful than me. I want everything for you that I don't have. I want you to have it. And then that's a beautiful thing, because if he doesn't do that and I feel a pressure, then I'm a different father. And there's this weight to that of like, now I want that for my kids. And the way that circles work and life works is some little asshole a couple generations from now is going to screw that up again.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's going to start to get twisted, but for now, it's really cool that like that culturally that shifted for us, and I think that comes from the time period as well.
And that's one of the things that's interesting, and I see as you're talking about this, and that informs my own fumbling navigation through my own life, is that my dad was both your grandfather and your dad.
Right.
My dad had kids in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, which sounds more impressive than it actually is. He was 20 and his wife was 19, and they didn't know what the hell they were doing at that point, and just started having kids because that's what you did. Irish populate the world. And so my eldest half brothers, the 2 oldest ones, and then the sister and brother in the middle, they had a different
experience.
Dad
than
I did. And I think that my father broke the cycle to the best of his ability with not only the generations that preceded him, but with the version of himself. And that's complicated because you carry around guilt and shame about that you can try to do the best you can retroactively, but you really have to just do the best you can moving forward, which makes it a very complicated story in my family.
I'm sure.
With some of my elder siblings and how they feel about him and the version of him each of us got and all of that. And I don't begrudge anyone their feelings about that. I think it's actually all true at the same time. But it does also present a model to me that I don't know if I saw until literally right now, that kind of dovetails with the experience of the last 11 years of my life, where there was like an at-hand model of somebody who was really imperfect. We all are, but who was really imperfect. And the best he could do with that was be like, well, I got to do the best I can moving forward because I can't go back. You can try to go back and own. You have to own your shit. Yep. That's it. You have to own your shit. You can't necessarily undo the shit that you did, but you have to own reality.
Right.
You live in reality. And so that just hearing that made me sort of see some of that in a way that I hadn't thought of prior. But
guys, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, it was
Thank
great.
you very much. This has been a blast.
I feel like we've gone on a journey together.
We have.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.